My name is Megan Smith, and I'm going to teach you how to defend the pro-life position. I am the current president of Boilermakers for Life, a parishioner at St. Tom's, and a former intern at Create Equal, which is a pro-life organization. So if you're here, you obviously know that we have a big problem in our culture. It's that 58 million children have been aborted legally since 1973. And I know 58 million is a really large number, and it's very hard to fathom what is really that effect. I struggle to even know what 200 people looks like. So I want to give you a quick visual tool, or more of a sound tool, to kind of really understand what 58 million children missing from our country sounds like.
Right where you are, I just want you to, right there in your seats, just shut your eyes. What you're about to hear are the sounds of metal BB striking the side of a tin can. For every BB that strikes, it represents 10,000 lives lost in the wars of America's past. 10,000 lives for every BB. This is the reality of what is occurring in your country. The American Revolution, the Civil War, World War I, World War II, the Korean conflict, the conflict in Vietnam, September 11th and the War on Terror. Since 1973, the War on the Unborn Child. God help us.
That video is actually made several years ago, so that actually is only 40 million plus 18 million on top of the 3,000 children that will be aborted today. So this is a huge problem. It's a Holocaust that's occurring legally in our country, and very few people have the apologetic skills or the desire to speak up for the unborn. We're the only people who will do it, and it's important that we make the effort to have the best case for life that we possibly can. Hi. So we know we know what the problem is. Now we just need to know, how do we approach the topic with people? For any of you who like debate, there is one thing that you have to do as you prepare to to enter into a debate. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? Yes.
Frame the discussion.
Yes, you have to frame your debate. So when you do that, we have really one central question that we're going to be dealing with, and it is, what is the preborn? This is really the central question of the entire abortion debate, because if the preborn are not human, then it's no different than clipping your fingernails or cutting your hair. We really have no right to tell a woman what she can and can't do with her body. But if the preborn are human, then there's no justification that is adequate to defending killing a human being. So it really comes down to this point. And this is often a question that when you're talking to people, they'll try to squirm out of. They'll just be like, well, let's talk about women's rights. Or they'll start throwing a lot of things that are not even related to the issue of abortion at you. They'll throw, well, what do you think about the wage gap or gun rights or LGBT community or what was some other things I heard? Oh, animal rights. These are all arguments that I've had thrown at me while talking about abortion. And while a lot of those things people have valid concerns about, they're irrelevant to the topic of abortion, and we really have to try to rein people back in to focus on what's the preborn. So if you can get them to that point, you're like, okay, now what? Like they're going around, they're saying, well, it's a person, but it's not, or it's a human, but it's not really a person yet. It's a potential life, but it's, it's not fully developed. And so there's lots of different arguments. Do you guys have any arguments that you've heard in the past that you can think of?
Just mostly when people say that it actually becomes a human is mostly the argument.
Yeah, like it's a potential life. It's not there yet.
They don't really acknowledge that at conception it is human. They usually pick some arbitrary time beyond that. Like, okay, now it's not okay.
Yeah, that's great. Anything else can you think of? Yeah.
It's also the bodily autonomy argument, which is basically like it's alive, it's like a person, but because it's like inside the woman, she has like executive authority over like what happens to it until it's born because it's like inside her.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good one. Anything else? These are all good.
They'll also make the argument of like the quality of life of the infant after being born. If it's too poor, they rationalize ending that child's life with saying you'd be worse off living.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good one. Mayfany, do you have another one?
Yeah, people like make the distinction between humanhood and personhood.
Yeah, what is that? Yes. No, these are all really good. The next thing that we also need to talk about with people, and this is going to relate to my next point, all these come down to is, would this matter if you were comparing to a born person's situation? So you're talking about poverty levels or life of the mother, all the different situations that you guys have listed. If we were to put a born person in those situations, we would never say, oh, the person's in poverty, let's just kill them. These are it's insane. Like, nobody thinks that's okay. Another one that I've heard is about pain, that the preborn can't feel pain, so therefore it's okay to kill them. And I want to give a quick kind of demonstration of why this is irrelevant. I don't know if any of you know who this is. Her name is Gabby Gingras, and she was born with a very rare genetic disorder that she can't feel pain. So when she was born and before her parents had her diagnosed, she would scratch at her eyes and be laughing. That's why you notice she's wearing goggles. She actually had to have one of her eyes removed because she damaged it so badly, and she can't feel pain. She used to chew at her tongue like bubble gum. Her hands got like third-degree burns, and she didn't even flinch. It's really a very serious condition that her parents and her have to monitor. She's about 15 now, but it's something that obviously it's a big constraint on her life. So we look at somebody like Gabby, and when a pro-choice person says, well, we should be able to kill the preborn because they can't feel pain, if we were to turn to them and say, would it be okay to kill Gabby? They're, of course, going to say, well, no, of course not. Like, no, you can't kill Gabby. And then the important thing for you to say is, why not? Why not? They just said it was okay to kill a preborn person who can't feel pain. Why is it not okay to kill Gabby? And they'll say, because they're human, or something along those lines. And that's where you take your finger and you go, aha! Aha, so it's not really about whether they can feel pain or the level of poverty or a woman's right to her body. It's what's the preborn. And you've got back to your framing the debate, and you've gotten back to your central question. Now let's say you're talking to somebody and they're not bringing up feeling pain, or you don't remember Gabby's story because you're talking to them and you're nervous. And I'm going to give you a very simple thing that I learned from Scott Klusendorf, which is trotting out the toddler. And now there are essentially what you do is you can compare a born child to a preborn child and their situation or their circumstances. So if you were to say an unplanned pregnancy of a college student who she faces, if this pregnancy is going to be a very big constraint on her, she might have to drop out of school, she's not going to be able to further her career very much, would you say that it's okay to, are you going to force this woman to have this child? So you can say, well, that's a really good point. I know pregnancy can be it's a very trying thing on a woman. I'm not trying to diminish the fact that being a parent is a full-time responsibility, and obviously this girl made a mistake and we're not trying to punish her. But let me just give you a quick analogy. So let's say that I have this little girl named Emma. She's 2 years old and her mom's in school right now, and she's trying to get her degree in business, and Emma is just a very time-consuming, needy child, like most 2-year-olds. And it is really pushing on what this mom's capabilities are. She's not able to study as much as she wants to, she's falling behind in classes, and it's becoming a real time constraint having Gabby as a daughter. Would it be okay for the mom to kill Emma? And at this point, pro-choice people will probably look at you a little horrified and be like, no, of course not. Again, of course not. And you're going to ask them what? Yes, why not? And they're going to say because it's human or something along those lines. And it's really that simple. So now you can then compare them back to, you can then go back and compare the preborn child, to this situation of the born child and show that there's no difference in the fact that the situations are both hard situations, but the answer is never to kill the child. Now, we do need to recognize, however, that there are several differences between the born and the preborn, right? We know that they can't read Shakespeare, and they can't ride bikes, and they can't, get up here and give a presentation, right? Very similar to an infant, they lack a lot of capabilities. But that does not mean that they're less of a person, right? Because we can look at infants and say, well, an infant can't do this, an infant can't do that. That does not mean we have the right to kill them. But it's important to acknowledge those differences. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is when we're framing our debate, you can use Bible scripture, quotes and references, if you're talking to somebody who shares those values with you. It's totally fine. I usually refrain from using the Bible personally, just because if you're talking to someone in college and you're talking to, let's say you're talking to Joe Pagan, and you start saying, well, in the Bible it says this and this and this and this, and scripture is a good source of authority, but to Joe Pagan, it's not. So if you say, well, in the Bible it says you're not allowed to kill people, and he says, well, I don't believe in the Bible, your whole argument is out the window. So it's important that we meet people where they're at and debate with them on a scientific and philosophical level. With that being said, the science part of it is very much on our side, which is awesome. And the philosophy. Actually, everything's on our side. So, does anyone know how many chromosomes you get from mom and dad? Any guesses? From each. 23 from mom and... Yes, so you make up a total of 46 chromosomes. Yes, a total of 46 chromosomes from mom and dad, total from mom and dad at fertilization. This means at fertilization you have everything you need. It's determining your hair color, your eye color, anything that you can think of. Your distinct DNA is present at fertilization. And we know, along with that, the composition of the fertilized, I hate the term, it's not fertilized egg, but of the zygote has everything that it needs. So it's very different than sperm and egg. So sperm has a very specific behavior where it's seeking an egg, and the egg has a very specific behavior of waiting for the sperm. But when you have a zygote, it no longer has this nature. It has a completely new nature about it. And this is a very important distinction to make when you're talking to people, because it's not a fertilized egg. It's not just a different type of sperm or a different type of egg. It's very distinct, whole, and living. Oh no. So the main things to talk about with this, like the science aspect of it, to remember at fertilization, you have is that the child is a distinct, living human, and they're whole. So kind of breaking this down, because that's 4 words on the screen. You're like, what does this mean? So they're distinct, like I said, in regards to they have a very distinct nature about themselves. They're living simply, I once heard someone say, that dead things don't grow, right? A preborn person cannot be non-living because they develop. It's really that simple. And we know they're human from the law of biogenesis, which states that species reproduce after their species. So dogs reproduce, they have dogs. Cats reproduce, they have cats. Humans reproduce, and they have... Yes, okay. You know more about abortion than a large percentage of our community. So, and the last part is really important as well, is they are a whole human being. The whole aspect is something you may hear people say things to like, oh, well, so do you cry every time a woman has a period? And, you know, is that a dead baby? Like, what, you know, and they try to kind of, they're being condescending. They don't actually think that, obviously, but they are trying to prove to you that, look, like, you don't actually believe this. It's why fertilization? Like, back it up all the way to when a woman has a period. And this is confusing parts versus whole. So if I were to give you an example of, if let's say my arm gets chopped off, right? I am still Megan. I know this is morbid. I'm still Megan, regardless of the fact that I have only one hand, right? You are still a whole person. That's the difference between like skin cells and a human being. So if I were to rub my skin cells off, like, no one's going to cry over the death of my skin cells because that's just part of me. It's not a whole me. So that's a very important thing to talk to people about. An analogy that I've given people before is how they're viewing our development is like cars. So when you go to a car manufacturer, or if you ever watch any of those how they're built shows, I like those. So like you can see that they're slapping on the shell, and then they put all these things on in different parts. And there's debate on, well, when does it really become a car? Is it when they have the wheels on, or is it when, the car's driving out of the lot? When is that point? But we're not like a car. We're more like a Polaroid picture, if any of you still know what that is, right? Right? Like, you'd be surprised. So it's very hip right now, though. So, so you probably do. So with a Polaroid, if I were to say, an analogy that Stephanie Gray gives is that she's out on a boat and and she sees the Loch Ness Monster, and she takes a picture with her Polaroid camera, and she turns to her friend and she says, oh my gosh, I just saw the Loch Ness Monster. And she goes, where is he? And he was like, well, it just disappeared, but I have this photo. And they're like, and the friend takes the photo and says, there's nothing here. Like, you didn't see anything. And they rip up the photo and throw it out. Obviously, the friend would be very upset, right? She'd be like, I had proof. I had real proof in front of me that this monster exists, and you just threw it out. The point is, with that, she just had to wait. Everything that she needed for the picture to develop was captured in an instance. She just needed time. And that's what we're talking about with the issue of abortion, is the preborn has everything they need from the moment of fertilization. They just need time. Just like we don't get upset when a 2-year-old doesn't have a period. It's very natural that they're not developed to that point. It's just a matter of time before she develops those functions. Does anyone have any questions about that? Okay. So next I want to talk about what do embryologists say. And it's actually really helpful for us because a lot of times people will say, well, it's fine for your religious belief to believe that at fertilization it's a human, but that's not actually scientifically correct. But that's not what any leading embryology textbook says. This is just one of several examples that I have that say, a zygote is the beginning of a new human being. Human's development begins at fertilization. Another one, it is incorrect to say that biological data cannot be decisive. It is scientifically correct to say that an individual human life begins at conception. And again, after fertilization, a new human being has come into being. It is no longer a matter of taste or opinion. It is plain experimental evidence. And these are all from either from embryology textbooks, or we see on the top a Harvard Medical School doctor. So these are very renowned, prominent people among the medical community who are saying this isn't really up for debate whether they're human. And I wish this was where it ended, where I said, all right, you've got the case for life. I've proven they're human scientifically. Go out and talk to people. But unfortunately, especially on a college campus, it is no longer enough to say they are human and therefore they are valuable. In today's society, you have to prove, so what? They're human, so what? What makes humans valuable? And that's kind of what Mayfini was talking about earlier, was, okay, it's a human, but is it a person? Tom Sheave actually said, even if everyone agreed on when life begins, there would still be a wide disagreement on whether being alive gives a human automatic personhood. And I'd like to ask Mr. Sheave, what exactly does a human who's not a person look like? Can he read? Can he talk? Can he communicate? I've never actually seen a human who's not a person. And his claim is that there are some differences between the preborn and the born that are so big that it stops them from being persons. And that's what we were kind of talking about a little bit before. And I want to talk about these differences because they're real and they do exist. Like I was saying before, with Shakespeare or reading books or giving presentations, the preborn can't do those things. But my question is, why does it matter? So there are 4 differences between the preborn that exist, and I have not come across any argument that cannot be placed into one of these 4 categories. And it's an acronym called SLED. So you have size, level of development, environment, and dependency. So with that, obviously, when we're looking at size, a preborn person is much smaller than you or I, just as a football player is a lot taller than a ballerina. Their level of development is much smaller. As we see on the left, the little zygote is obviously far less developed than Captain America. And and their environment is, sorry, gotta throw that in there. Their environment is very different as well. They're in the shelter of their mother's womb while we are out in the world talking and having conversations with people. And their dependency is far greater than you or I's. And going back to the point though, these differences do exist, but our question should always be, why does that matter? And you can use this to talk to people by comparing their differences of born people that we acknowledge both have value. So like I said with the football player and the ballerina, we recognize that both these people are human beings that have rights and they're equal. And so if their value is not because of their size, why should the value of the preborn be placed on their size? The next one, level of development, you can say things like, we have back home, I know a little 5-year-old, and she is just learning how to read. I can read very well. Unfortunately, I read too much with school, and so I read almost all day. But she is just barely learning to read because her development is although it's at the correct level for her age, she's a lot less developed than I am. But that does not mean that I have a greater right to life than she does. And again, our environment. At the next week, I'm going to Washington, D.C. for the March for Life, and I will be changing my location from West Lafayette to Washington, D.C., and nowhere in between there will my personhood change, despite my drastic change in location. Shockingly, our environment does not determine our personhood, so that's a big one when you're talking to people. The last one is dependency. So being college students, we've faced a lot of varying degrees of dependency, going from high school where it's basically everything we asked was, at least in my family, was you had to ask your parents, like, can I go here, can I go here? And it was like 20 questions, who, where, why, when, how, like how are you getting there, etc. Versus now, every couple of days I call my parents to say, hey, what's going on? Like, hi. I don't really ask for permission to do things anymore. But my varying level of dependency is not a attribute to my personhood. I didn't become more of a person now that I'm less dependent. And furthermore, my sister is now out of college, and she is far less dependent than I am on my parents, and she is not more of a person than I. Although she might like to dispute that. So these are 4 categories that you will always find when talking to people. You will not find a category that will not fit into this. If you do, please let me know. But this is a very solid differences group. And someone else in history recognized that differences exist between people, but that does not mean that that we are not persons. And this was Abraham Lincoln. When he was speaking on the issue of slavery, he said, "You say A is white and B is black. It is color then, the lighter having the right to enslave the darker. Take care, by this rule you are saying to be slave to the first man you meet, with a fairer skin than your own. So you don't mean color exactly. You mean the whites are intellectually the superiors to blacks, therefore have the right to enslave them. Take care again. By this rule, you are to be enslaved by the first man you meet with the intellectual superior to your own. But say it is the question of interest, and you are to say you are to make it your interest. You have the right to enslave another. Very well." And so he points out that so his example essentially is, you are fine, slavery, okay, if you're going to say it's the matter of being white that makes you superior, then you are only as superior or your own person until you meet someone else who is lighter than yourself. And this is a really great quote because it shows that when you place equality like that, it puts it on a sliding scale. No one's ever truly equal. It's just you are as equal to the next person until you find someone who's older or more developed or larger or less dependent than you are. So when we base our rights on these differences, it skews equality. So today we do still see inequalities, though, right? So we see inequalities between race. So if somebody is, if we were to have people who are against African Americans, what would that be? Right? And then if you have people who are against people because of their gender, that would be, right? And then lastly, if you were to have somebody who is prejudiced against somebody because of their age, it would be called, any guesses? Ageism. Yeah, how can it? So that is really the new prejudice of our times. And it's important that we put it in those terms because that's really what it is. We're discriminating against people because of their age, because they're not able to function at the same level as another person, but they're functioning at the developmental stage that they're meant to. So kind of putting that all together, I wanted to give a quick example of overpopulation. I don't know if you've ever heard this example with people when you're talking about abortion, but it's very common, especially in a college community. So if you were to say, if I'm pro-choice and I say, we can't have more people coming into the world. If we were to make abortion illegal, we'd have all these people. You wouldn't be able to feed them. You wouldn't be able to take care of them. And are you going to adopt them? So that was a very loaded. We can take apart. So the first thing that we want to talk about though is if they're human, right? Because if we were to take the overpopulation example, we could say, well, in that case, wouldn't we just eliminate the elderly because they're not providing resources and they're just consuming resources, which I will point out is a shared belief between Hitler and the Nazi Party. I just wanted to make that point really quick, that was actually a big, the functionalist view of what we're talking about today is a very prominent belief among the Nazi Party, which is very shocking and horrifying that we're drifting towards that. So we're going to get to are they human though, right? Because if we can't kill the elderly because they're not contributing, we shouldn't be able to kill the preborn. So we ask, what is the preborn? Then you're going to remember the living, whole, distinct human being. Bring that out. You can use SLED or trot out the toddler and get that person back to being pro-life. Does that make sense? Does anyone have any questions or clarifications? Okay. So the next big thing to talk about are the hard cases. So these are these are some really common things that you will, if you talk to people about abortion, will likely come up. With rape and incest, the most important thing to do before talking about your pro-life position at all is to acknowledge rape. Rape is a horrible thing, and we need to be compassionate when talking to people. There are really going to be two types of people that ask this question. There's going to be people who are crusading and they just want to make you look like an awful person. And then there's people who have a personal experience with it, or they genuinely want to know what your position is. And so it's important to be very sensitive and careful when approaching this topic and being compassionate with the people that you talk to. One of the things that I like to ask people is kind of say, okay, like, I don't agree. I don't think abortion should be allowed in cases of rape, but let's just say for a hypothetical situation that I was okay with it. Could we agree that the other 99% of abortions are wrong? And that's where you're going to weed out the two groups. So the crusader is going to say, well, no, I actually think that abortion should be allowed in all cases. And then the people who genuinely want to know that answer, they're going to be like, yeah, okay. So now you have your two groups. So the group that says, no, I think abortion is okay in all cases, you go back to, okay, let's talk about rape, but first let's talk about the 99%. And you go back to what's the preborn and start that whole process. For the people who say, yes, I can agree that the 99% of abortions are wrong and should be illegal, you want to talk, you can use trot out the toddler. So basically, there's several different trot out the toddlers that you can use, but one that I use a lot is that a man and a woman have sex one night, and then the next day the woman's out and she gets raped. She finds out she's pregnant, but she doesn't know who's the father. Is it her husband or is it the rapist? And she decides to carry the baby to term. When the baby's born, they find out that the baby was conceived in rape. Would it be okay for the mom to have the baby killed? And they're of course going to say no, because they're human. And that's important because you can say, okay, so if it's not okay to kill the baby who was conceived in rape after they are born, why is it okay to kill the baby who is conceived in rape before they're born? And then you'll get to the real crux of what they think is the defining factor for the personhood. So it might be, well, they're not yet developed, or they're not the environment, they're still in the mom, or they're so tiny, they're just like a little pea. And that's going to get you back to SLED, and you can compare them then to a born person. Does that make sense? I know that's a really hard one, and it's very sensitive when you're talking to people. It's really important that you acknowledge that rape is a horrible thing, and that my thing is that I usually say is, I can't even imagine what that woman would be going through, not only to be raped and violated in such a horrible way, but then to find out she's pregnant. I can't imagine that, and I think we should be offering her a lot of resources and help and support. I also think that man should be held to the full extent of the law. But how is punishing an innocent person going to unrape that woman? And that's something that I've asked people in the past is, will having an abortion unrape that woman? It kind of stops people and makes them think like, no, it's not. We also know that statistically, women who have been raped and then have abortion are higher rates of suicide and drug addictions and relationship issues versus women who are raped and then give birth, whether that to parent the child or to give the baby up for adoption. So people might say, well, yeah, but it'll help her if she has this abortion. And if you're looking purely at statistics, the best thing for the woman's mental health, taking the baby out of the picture, would actually be to give birth to the baby. So those are just some points to consider. The last one, life of the mother. So there's actually only two incidents where a mother's life is truly in danger in cases of pregnancy, and that is there's this thing called, a lot of times it's referred to as like a tubal pregnancy, and it's basically where you have the baby does not implant in the uterus, and they usually plant in like the fallopian tubes, or they might implant somewhere else that's not natural, but it's mostly the fallopian tubes. And if you know any like biology about how the reproduction system works, the fallopian tubes are not meant to stretch, and so as the baby develops, the fallopian tube will rupture, the mom will most likely die, and the baby will definitely die because of our current medical technology. So this is a serious condition. It's not a common condition, but it is very serious. then we do have to address it. So how we answer this question is, as pro-life people, we want to do the greatest moral good. We don't want to just say, well, like, no, like, you can't do anything, like, just let the mom and the baby die. That doesn't make sense. We want to help. We want to do the greatest moral good. So what we do in this situation is we were to say that you can remove that portion of the fallopian tube where the baby is, and it's a foreseen future that because of our medical technology, we know that the baby, when taken out of the environment, she won't survive. But the intention is not to end the pregnancy or to kill the baby. The intention is to save the mother's life, which is not an abortion, because an abortion is we're going in to the specific intention of an abortion is to have the mother no longer be pregnant. They're getting rid of the baby. Obviously, like, the hope is in one day we'll have the technology that we could move the baby somewhere else, or we could move the baby down to the uterus. But because of our current technology, we don't have that. So that would be the morally permissible thing to do. Does that make sense? Any questions? I know.
So that procedure would just remove the baby and then the baby would die in the uterus?
So a lot of times when that procedure actually happens, the baby's already has already died, because you usually don't detect this until the mom comes in with severe abdominal pain. It might be possible that the baby hasn't died yet when they remove the fallopian tube, but
There's like no way to save them though.
there's nothing we can do. So if we don't do anything, the mom and baby will die, but if we remove that portion of the fallopian tube, the mom can survive. An analogy that I like to use is, I'm all about analogies. An analogy that I like to use is, if you're in a burning building and I see my sister and I see some other person, and they're both knocked out, and they've passed out. I don't know. They couldn't handle this. Yeah, they couldn't handle the stress. Don't worry, you're saved. I got you. So Tom is passed out as well, and Casey's over there, and I see Casey, and I can only grab one of them, and I decide to grab Casey and take her out with me. And I know the foreseeable future is that I can't take Tom with me, and Tom will die, but my intention is not to kill Tom. I don't take out a gun and shoot Tom. I say I can only save one, and I choose to save Casey. So you're welcome. So that's kind of the analogy I